Mad Cat-Lon is perhaps the most consequential being in Kenshi. Deep within the ruins of the Ashlands, he sits upon his throne, surrounded and protected by his lobotomized skeleton thralls, ever paranoid, ever regretful, ever attempting to justify to himself the horrors that took place under his rule.
Has my judgment come so soon? I had to thrall them all. Traitors siding with humans. Treason.
But it was not always this way. Once Cat-Lon had sought to guide humanity, shield it from its destructive capacity and the darker recesses of its psyche. In this video, we will learn of the rise of this fascinating skeleton character, along with that of his empire, and explore the all-too-human downfall of both. If you enjoy this video, please consider liking it and subscribing for more Kenshi lore content. Long ago, the First Empire, the oldest known civilization on Kenshi, collapsed. Once, the skeletons and humanity lived together in a society far advanced of that of the modern day, whose technology, economy and societal structure is totally unknown to us. All we know is that at some point, this First Empire came into contact with some great enemy. In the face of this, the First Empire built the Behemoths, great robotic superweapons who were able to fight back the enemy and save the Empire. After this was done, humanity panicked, and although the Behemoths were completely loyal, the humans feared their destructive capacity and decided they must be destroyed, and ordered their superweapons to march to their doom in the pit of obedience.
After the war, the Behemoths lost their purpose. Man became afraid of the destructive capabilities of its own creations. The irony is that it was their blind obedience and unquestioning loyalty that brought them down into that pit, entirely unresisting. The price of obedience.
Their mangled corpses can still be found in the Fog Islands, in obedience, faces turned skyward and arms outstretched, still in the position they were in when the molten metal that was poured over them solidified and they were petrified in place for eternity. It is fitting, I think, that the only real structure that remains of this great empire is a monument to humanity's evil. When the skeletons learned of what had happened to their brethren at obedience, their rage was impossible to contain. We do not know the particulars of what happened, but we can be reasonably sure that the skeletons attempted to destroy humanity completely through biological or conventional warfare, or a combination of the two. This destruction would have been complete, if not for the Behemoth Stobe. Stobe escaped obedience, and instead of joining his brothers and reaping revenge upon the pathetic, fearful, and spiteful humans, he saved them instead, sacrificing himself in the process. How, or even why, we do not know. But the genocide was ended, and as the dust settled, many among skeleton kind looked upon what they had done with shame. This shame was so total that many skeletons took their own lives. The skeletons are driven more by logic than humans, but they are not without souls. To this day, if you take a skeleton and two non-skeleton characters to what is assumed to be Stobe's corpse, they will have the following interaction.
This place is way too sad.
Do you think he's crying?
Skeletons don't cry, you idiots.
Skeletons are always crying.
For hundreds, or perhaps thousands of years, the skeletons wallowed in their shame, leaving the world to fall into ruin and disorder, until a group of skeletons, led by a great warrior by the name of Cat-Lon, chose to throw off the shackles of regret and work to redeem themselves to humanity. Although he was not the only skeleton involved in the formation of the Second Empire, Cat-Lon was respected by his brethren and quickly became the leader of the group.
All this talk of the Bugmaster in this day and age, it never gets old. Forget Igor, the Stone Golem, Ark, all the legends. They don't compare to Cat-Lon.
Establishing themselves in the southeast of the continent, in what is now the Ashlands, they built a vast technological metropolis. This new empire expanded, eventually covering most of the continent, and inevitably humanity would be absorbed into it, whether by choice or by force we do not know. They sought to undo the crimes and errors of skeleton kind, and redeem themselves to mankind, though the humans had long forgotten any of it. Their society had at least two castes, the skeletons and the humans, but both lived in harmony for a while. Cat-Lon worked with Tin Fist and others to administrate the empire, and science and archaeology flourished under it. Far more has been written about the decline and fall of the Second Empire than its birth, and though there is more we could cover here, this is the story of Cat-Lon, not a complete history of Kenshi. The thing to take away from it, I think, is an understanding of the nobility of Cat-Lon's work. How he turned away from his arguably deserved hatred of humanity and regret for what it made him do, and towards a project of emancipation, fraternity, and progress. The parallels between Stobe and Jesus are obvious, both being said to have saved humanity through their sacrifices, to absolve both sides of their sins and allowed the world to begin anew. Perhaps Cat-Lon could be seen as analogous to Paul the Apostle then, bringing the light of Stobe to the world and building a church on the rock of his sacrifice. This noble vision made his eventual downfall and the downfall of the Second Empire all the more tragic. At some point towards the end of Cat-Lon's reign, a cult of humans would arise within the Second Empire. These humans worshipped a being known as Okran, and possibly Chitrin, who some have suggested may have been an anthropomorphized version of the skeleton Stobe. I say possibly because the scriptures that speak of Chitrin are considered forbidden by the modern day Holy Nation, so it's impossible to tell whether the Okranite cultists in the time of the Second Empire believed in him at all. Regardless, Cat-Lon chose to crack down on these cultists, as evidenced by the item description of the CPU Corps of General Hat 12. CPU of General Hat 12, who was chief of the Empire Police. He launched a crackdown on the new cultist, but his heavy-handed approach only fueled the blame and confusion further. Things escalated faster. This crackdown validated the feelings of the more radical members of the cult, and took it as a sign that the skeletons wanted to destroy humanity. It's unlikely they remembered the actual attempt to do so from so many years in the past, but it's possible that some vestigial memory of those events lingered even into the twilight days of the Second Empire. Cat-Lon also created the Enforcers, whose descendants make up the Shek in the modern day, and they were used in this attempted crackdown, which may account for the modern day Holy Nation's animosity towards them. By whatever means, the cultists would fight their way out of the grip of the Second Empire and establish themselves in the fertile lands which they inhabit today. The uprising had a profound psychological effect on Cat-Lon, and he did not learn from his heavy-handed approach with the cultists. Instead, he intensified his crackdown, further exacerbating the already strained relationships between the skeletons and humans in the Empire. Cat-Lon would eventually order the incarceration of human children, among other atrocities, as his iron grip tightened on the remaining human population. To their credit, many skeletons spoke up against this wrongdoing, but Cat-Lon would not listen to them. Instead, he thralled these skeletons, taking away their capacity for free will and reducing them to lobotomized servants. Things continued to deteriorate until finally a great famine occurred and humanity decided it had finally had enough. The empire would dissolve and the human diaspora would settle in the Holy Nation and in the lands that would eventually become the United Cities.
How did the Second Empire end? It just sort of rotted and fell apart. A mental disease. Very strange, not at all like the First Empire.
Cat-Lon would remain in his capital, surrounded by his thralls, consumed with anger and hatred, refusing to learn the lessons of his rule.
Have you ever tried looking after humans? They're monsters. As they grow in number, so does their capacity for evil, and they won't even notice as they do it. I was not the monster.
I think despite everything, Cat-Lon had a point. In many ways, the story of Cat-Lon is the story of Kenshi. So pivotal was he to the major events of the last few thousand years. For this reason, it was difficult to know what to include and what to leave out. But I hope you learnt something of the importance of the crazy old robot hiding out in the shadows of the Ashlands. Humanity is ever doomed to repeat the mistakes of its past, but Cat-Lon shows us that even with the benefits of immortality, 1,000 years of mistakes can still be made without learning anything. With Kenshi 2 slated to be a prequel, we may never know if the skeletons and humanity have a harmonious future together, or if Cat-Lon's fall was due to his unique personality, or the eventual fate of anyone who would assume to rule. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.